Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is Speaking Lesson 7. Today we'll start by setting goals, and then we'll work on pronunciation of past tense verbs. Then we'll practice using the past tense in conversation. We'll talk about bothering to do things. And then we'll finish by talking about making sense. Here are some speaking tips. So first and foremost, it's important to relax. We're going to talk a lot better when we're relaxed. And you should speak as loudly as you would normally. So use your regular speaking voice. A lot of us, when we're practicing, we want to speak more softly, but that's not a good habit. And finally, just remember it's okay to make mistakes. Don't feel bad. The important thing is that you just do a little bit better than you did last time. So first, let's set some goals. It's important to set goals so you have things to focus on. What do we hope to improve? Is it pronunciation, fluency, accuracy, variety, or mastery? Or maybe you just want to work on everything all together. So let's start by talking about ed endings. Let's start by seeing if you can hear the difference in how the past tense is pronounced. So here we see two columns. In these past tense verbs, the ed ending is pronounced differently in one column than in the other column. So let's start with the first column and listen carefully to how the ed ending is pronounced. Laughed, talked, touched, washed, stopped, kissed. And now let's listen to the second column. So these are also just regular past tense verbs, but the ed will sound different in this column. Hugged, judged, mailed, added, loved, showed. Could you hear the difference? In this first column, the ed ending sounds like a T. T, t, t. Laughed, talked, touched, washed, stopped, kissed. In the second column, the ed makes the D sound like a D. Hugged, judged, mailed, added, loved, and showed. The difference is that the T sound is an unvoiced sound, and the D sound is called a voiced sound. So in the next slide, we'll talk about the difference between unvoiced and voiced sounds. So the first thing you want to do here is you want to find your voice box by placing several fingers lightly on your throat. When you put your hand on your voice box, you will feel vibrations. That means your voice box will move slightly and it will make a buzz feeling under your fingers. All right, so just talk, say la, la, la. You can feel your voice box vibrating. So in the left-hand column, we have unvoiced sounds. So when you make these sounds, your voice box shouldn't really vibrate. So let's put your hand on your voice box and make these sounds. P, k, t, f, s, ch. When you make these sounds, your voice box should not be moving. But in the pink column, the voiced sounds, you will feel your voice box vibrate. So let's make these sounds and keep touching your voice box. B, g, d, v, s, j, m, n, and all the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and Y. So these columns are put in pairs because these are called the voiced and unvoiced pairs. So P and B are a pair, but P is the unvoiced sound and B is the voiced sound, right? K is the unvoiced sound and G is the voiced sound. So pause the video and practice making these sounds and just feel the difference in when your voice box moves and when it doesn't move. And you can see here that the third pair, T and D, which is the sound that the ed endings can make, depending on if it follows an unvoiced or a voiced sound. So if we go back to our list, we look at the last sound in the word before the ed ending. And we can see that these are unvoiced sounds, and so it will end with an unvoiced ending. So the last sound in laugh is f, which is unvoiced, right? F, f, f. Your voice box doesn't move if you put your fingers on it. So yeah, go ahead and put your fingers back on your throat, on your voice box, and let's practice. Laughed, ft. So when you make the ft sound, you should not feel your voice box vibrate. And talked. You should not feel your voice box vibrate. Ch, touched, 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 and washed, and stopped, and kissed. If your regular verb ends with an unvoiced sound, you just add the t and just make sure your voice box doesn't start to vibrate if it isn't already vibrating. Then in the pink column, the voice sounds, these are all sounds that do have a voiced ending, like g, hugged, judged, mailed, right? So put your fingers back on your voice box or keep them there and practice this column. Hugged, judged, mailed, added, loved, showed. So we don't expect you to memorize this list, but just based on the sound that you last make in the verb, that's the kind of ending you should put after it, right? If you have an unvoiced sound, just tap your tongue, tap your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and don't add the buzzing sound. Okay, so let's practice by looking at these past tense verbs and seeing how you would pronounce them. Are they unvoiced sounds? Do they end with unvoiced sounds? And so would you make the t sound? Or do they end with voiced sounds, so you make the d sound? So pause the video and practice putting these verbs into the past tense and pronouncing them as either t or d, voiced or unvoiced endings. When you're finished practicing, you can unpause the video and then we'll talk about them together. Okay, so let's go over how these should be pronounced. Walked, called, passed, cooked, cleaned, managed, touched, played, sipped, and lied. Okay, now let's practice putting these verbs in the past tense in conversation. So answer these questions and just talk in the past tense. What did you do this morning? What did you do yesterday? What did you do last month? What did you do last summer? And how did you celebrate your birthday? So for example, for the first one, I would say, this morning I got up at 6 o'clock. I had breakfast. I fed my baby and I gave food to my dogs also. And then we went for a walk in the park. We walked for about an hour and then we came back and I fed the baby her second breakfast. So I cooked her an egg and I gave her some cheese and some fruit. That's her normal breakfast. And after that, I vacuumed the house like I do every Monday. And that's what I did this morning. And just in general, these are great questions to practice your speaking with any time of the day. So if you're really trying to work on your English, and especially your past tense verbs, which are hard for a lot of people, you should practice these every day. So every day or every night when you're getting ready to go to bed or you just have some free time, talk out loud and say what you did that day. So let's talk. Pause the video, answer these questions, and then move on. Next, we're going to practice using the phrase don't bother. So remember, don't bother means don't try or don't make an effort. So it can be used in two ways. The first way is a negative way, meaning someone didn't do something that was expected of them. So for example, you could say he was half an hour late and didn't even bother to call. That means, wow, that was really rude. He should have called, but he didn't even bother to call. That means he didn't make the smallest effort to tell me he would be late. And then there is a polite way to use don't bother, meaning you are telling someone not to take trouble to do something for you. So in this example, someone says, I'll make you something to eat. And you say, oh, don't bother, I'm not hungry. That means don't trouble yourself. Don't make an effort. It's not a big problem. So let's talk. I want you to try and give examples of how you would use don't bother. So for the first example, try to use don't bother in a negative way. Say someone did something bad and they didn't bother to do something else. And then try to say don't bother in a polite way. So if someone says, let me help you with your homework, what could you say? Finally, we're going to end by making conversation using the phrase make sense. So first, we're going to answer this question. What doesn't make sense to you? So remember, make sense means something is very easy to understand or it's logical. So to answer this question, you would say a noun or an ing verb doesn't make sense to me. Or I could say not wearing a mask doesn't make sense to me. Right? There are a lot of people right now during this pandemic who refuse to wear a mask, which is important because masks help to protect yourself and other people from coronavirus. So not wearing a mask doesn't make sense to me. And I highlighted the preposition to, because we have to say something doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, we have the question, how do you make sense of something that's confusing? And here I highlighted the preposition of because we make sense of something. So the something is the topic or the idea that you're trying to understand. So if something is confusing, you try to make sense of it. So for example, if I say physics doesn't make sense to me, then I would say I make sense of physics by studying harder. Or I make sense of physics by watching YouTube videos about physics. And for this, we would use by plus the ing verb. Okay, so let's talk. Pause the video, answer these questions using the verb phrase make sense. So that's it for our speaking lesson for today. So just keep practicing. Like I said, you should talk to yourself, practice the past tense verbs. I always tell my students to just talk aloud and practice saying what they did yesterday. That will really help you to remember those past tense verbs because there are a lot of them and we have a lot of irregular past tense verbs. And it's also a great way to practice your pronunciation. So keep practicing and join us for our next class, Class 8. Thanks and see you next time.